Sorry. No, not quite yet. I'm waiting for the. Okay, if you don't mind, I'll switch just for a minute, introduce you, and then I will bring you over. Okay. All right, we're gonna begin. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for attending. I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Mirian Martinez-Aranda as today's speaker. And she earned a PhD in sociology from UCLA and is currently a UC Presidential Postdoctoral Fellow at UC Davis. Dr. Martinez-Aranda's research examines the social, material, and health consequences of immigration detention on immigrants, families, and communities. She has two recent publications on this topic, one in Law and Society Review, and one in the Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies. So today she will present on this work and focus on ICE surveillance of immigrant communities and the effects of it. And after the talk, there will be a brief time for Q&A. And so I will let you manage that yourself, but I will be taking questions from people online and kind of bringing those to you as well. So join me in welcoming Dr. Mirian Martinez-Aranda.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am very excited to be here today. Thank you so much for the introduction, very kind. My name is Mirian Martinez-Aranda, and I am a Chancellor's Postdoctoral Fellow in UC Davis in the Department of Sociology. I am also an ethnographer and a social legal scholar with expertise in international migration, surveillance and punishment, and racialized health inequities. My research agenda is broadly about examining how immigration detention is fundamentally impacting immigrant families and communities in the United States. I trace experiences of immigrants after they are released from immigration detention to show how immigration enforcement policies constrain and shape the life of formerly detained immigrants, their families, and communities as they navigate family reunification, community reincorporation, and the effects of ICE surveillance on their health. Currently, I am working on a book project titled Life After Immigration Detention, the Continuum of State Violence Targeting Immigrants and Communities. And the book makes two central arguments. First, that immigrants that have been released from immigration detention continue to experience the violence of the state, which is characterized by this heightened threat of deportation and constant uncertainty. And second, that this state-sponsored violence has dire social and health and material consequences, not only for the former detainee, but also for their families and communities. And these consequences can range from banishment from the ethnic networks, also a loss of job opportunities, and an impact on their physical health and also their mental health. The analysis of this book draws on 34 months of ethnographic fieldwork in Southern California, in Los Angeles, Orange, and San Bernardino County areas between 2015 and 2018. What I did is that I conducted qualitative, in-depth, semi-structured interviews with 60 formerly detained people and 35 members of their family. Most of them came from Latin America, from countries such as Mexico, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. And furthermore, to learn about more in depth about their experiences of detention and how this impacted their families, I participated in go-alongs. By joining respondents as they traveled to salient appointments, including court appearances, visiting their family member that is in detention, and also going with them to the check-ins with ICE and the electronic monitor check-ins with this corporation that is called ICE. Today's talk, however, is based on one chapter of my book. This chapter focuses on the state's coercive power to punish immigrants through mass surveillance, even after they have been released from immigration detention. To examine the social mechanisms, I would like to first give you a background information on the immigration enforcement, then talk about the theoretical frameworks that guided this chapter on surveillance and punishment. And finally, I would like to focus on the empirical case of ICE surveillance on immigrant communities. I am very certain that all of you in this room have seen these images in the 24-hour news cycle. Images that capture the human suffering and the humanitarian crisis experienced by immigrants at the southern border and also in the interior of our country. Every day, children, women, men, queer, and trans people are apprehended, put in cages, detained, and deported by the thousands. However, this state-sponsored suffering is not new, for it has been inflicting pain for decades through anti-immigrant legislation that aims to criminalize and punish people. To put in context the evolution of immigration enforcement, first we need to acknowledge that the war on drugs and the prison industry expansion in the 1980s is what laid the foundation for today's immigration enforcement practices. However, what led to the escalation of immigrant criminalization in this country was that in 1996, former President Bill Clinton signed into law the Legal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, known as IRERA, and the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act. These two pieces of legislation gave way to the gradual conflation of criminal and civil immigration law, and also gave the state power to fabricate a new identity for immigrants, an identity where illegality was now infused with criminal overtones, giving rise to this new paradigm that we know today as crime-migration. Consequently, immigrant communities have experienced this heightened immigration enforcement under US state tactics of mass detention, surveillance, and exclusion through zero-tolerance immigration policies. The 1996 laws substantially expanded the criminal grounds that trigger detention and deportation. And in addition to instituting these fast-track deportation procedures and mandatory detention for certain individuals. Therefore, these laws lay the foundation for an expansive detention and deportation regime. These legislations also allow for detention facilities to expand across the US. Currently, there are more than 200 immigrant prisons and jails in the United States. Often, immigrants apprehended at the border or inside the US are sent to detention facilities. And these detention facilities resemble prisons because, as we know, the immigration system and the criminal legal system are interlocked in many ways. And I am more than happy to speak about these two parallel systems in the Q&A. However, what I want to make clear is that detention is not a sentence, but an administrative holding process. So long length of the stay are not related to any criminal record. In 2004, the yearly population was 235,000 and grew to an all-time high, more than 500,000 people in 2009. While in detention, immigrants face poor conditions, including rampant medical neglect, physical and sexual abuse, coercive and traumatizing solitary confinement, exploitative labor practices, And there is also immense hardships that spills over to the family members. During the Obama presidential administration and at the beginning of the Trump administration, Latino men were targeted by immigration enforcement. Latino men were the largest population in detention and the largest group that was deported, which to a certain extent made this experience of detention and deportation a gender story. And I want to quickly note that my data collection for this chapter specifically took place during the Obama and Trump administration. And in the case of immigrant women, they were placed under surveillance program. And most of them were allowed to leave detention with an electronic monitor, which makes this story of electronic monitoring also a gender story. Because their release from detention depended on the discretion of the ICE officers and the detention staff. And these women are the population that I focus on today in this talk. Women that have been released from detention with an electronic monitor. So IRERA and the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act also set the stage for new forms of immigration control, such as the electronic monitor, to appear in the immigration enforcement landscape. However, as we all know, the use of electronic monitors is not new, as people impacted by the criminal legal system has experienced this type of surveillance for a long time. But exactly how is it that the electronic monitor came to be deployed in immigrant communities? The use of electronic monitors became prevalent in immigrant communities right after the events of September 11th, which marked a shift toward intense supervision and surveillance within immigrant communities. During this time, the Department of Homeland Security was created in 2003. The Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, known as ICE, made its debut. And immediately, ICE implemented the program called Intensive Supervision Appearance Program, known as ISAP, which became the primary component of ICE's so-called Alternative to Detention program. ISAP then was outsourced for its implementation to the Behavioral Intervention Incorporated, known as the BI, which is a private corporation that introduced the electronic shuffle. In 2010, the GEO Group, the nation's largest private prison corporation, acquired the BI, and it's the one that operates now this ISAP program. And between 2006 and 2016, the budget for technological alternatives to detention increased exponentially. It went from 28 million to 114 million. And as of May of 2021, there were more than 96,000 individuals forced into ISAP, with approximately a third of such individuals subject to electronic monitoring. So the Intensive Supervision Appearance Program utilizes electronic monitors with GPS capabilities to track, to record, map, and report a person's movement and location in near real time. However, the electronic monitor has been reported by many immigrants that it malfunctions. And although at first the electronic monitor appears less punitive because in theory will allow immigrants to go back to their communities, to go back to their households, and they tend to have more freedom compared to the detention, the reality produced by this pre-migration system is a dire story. So generally, when we think about electronic monitors, they seem as a more humane option for the detainees and for their family, as compared to the horrors of detention. Because the monitors, like I mentioned before, right, allows people to live at home and move more freely. But my research shows that electronic monitor equals incarceration by another name. Not only does punishment and surveillance are compressed and packaged into these electronic shackles, producing uncertainty and anxiety to the person wearing the GPS echo monitor, but also the electronic monitor itself acts as a Trojan horse that extends the punishment of the state and brings surveillance to the families and to the rest of the community. So today's talk focuses on the following question. How do electronic monitors operate as a surveillance tool that shapes immigrants' relationship with the state, their relationship with their co-ethnic communities, and their mental health? And the findings I present today to you emerge from this inquiry. I turn to two bodies of literature to understand how the electronic echo monitor operates as a tool of state violence. The first body of literature is on social control. So Foucault tells us that panopticon induces in the individual a sense of permanent visibility and vulnerability, ensuring the functioning of power. I use Foucault panoptical theory to show that the state deploys individualized control technologies to impose discipline. My work builds on this previous literature by showing that the electronic monitor serves as a beacon that draws the gaze of the state into the home of immigrants and their communities. And to put Foucault in conversation with migration scholars, I employ Vigo's concept of panopticism that is also derived from Foucault's classical theory, which puts into question as to whether the objective of the state is to discipline immigrants into conformity or remove them. So within this framework, my contribution to the literature is that surveillance technologies such as the electronic monitor emerges as a disciplinary tool that simultaneously controls docile bodies, which is the panoptic aspect, and threatens to exile them, which is the panoptic aspect. A second line of a scholarship that shed lights on the consequences produced by this panoptic and panoptic technology is the literature on co-ethnic networks. And this literature indicates that immigrants rely on their networks for support, although under duress, economic circumstances, these sources of support can become complex and in some cases even toxic. However, what happens to these relationships when they are stressed by high surveillance? And in speaking to this scholarship, I contribute a critical analysis of how networks respond to this surveillance tool. So in this case, my study reveals how the electronic monitor as a tool of state violence strains ties among immigrants because it stratifies autonomy and freedom, restricting the mobility of electronic monitor wearers relative to immigrants who have greater economic and legal resources, or who have been spared this form of electronic surveillance. So by bringing these two bodies of literature on social control, that is panoptic and panoptic, and the efficacy of co-ethnic networks, I developed the framework of extended punishment to capture the harms produced by the electronic monitor within families and immigrant communities. So in the context of this study, extended punishment is a condition of surveillance. The first is experienced in detention and that radiates outside the walls of detention to continue to inflict punishment. In essence, the shackled immigrant carry the surveillance of detention with them wherever they go. And extended punishment is manifested in the material, social, and mental health harms produced by the electronic monitor and the consequences for immigrant families, for the immigrant themselves, their families, and communities. So the findings for this specific book chapter that I'm going to focus on today emerged from 21 months of ethnographic observation, semi-structured interviews, follow-up interviews, and informal conversations with 30 immigrants formerly detained, 25 women and 5 men, and monitored by an electronic monitor, collected between June 2015 and March 2017 in the Los Angeles metro area. And in the Q&A, I can talk more about the numerical differences between these respondents. So the interviews lasted 1 to 2 hours and were conducted in Spanish and English, and the questions were open-ended and addressed topics including perceptions and consequences of criminalization and illegality, the impact of the electronic monitor in their family life, how it impacted their mental health, and how it impacted their return to society. And also respondents were assigned pseudonyms in order to protect their confidentiality. I also gathered a lot of field notes as I accompanied participants to their check-ins with the ISAP office and also the ICE office. Also attended a lot of events with pro-immigrant community organizations. And in these spaces, I met a lot of former detainees and their families, right, that had an able monitor. So using this framework of extended punishment, I was able to analyze the relationship of immigrants shackled to an electronic monitor and how it operates as a surveillance tool of state violence that impacts the immigrants' relationship with the state, their relationship with their ethnic community, and their sense of self. So at the state level, the electronic monitor sends a signal that reifies the immigrant wearing the shackle as a criminal and thus triggers constant surveillance and punishment. In the case of the community, the electronic monitor sends the signal that the person wearing the shackle can't be trusted. And also because it represents, it has criminal overtones, right, that are associated with this. Also because the electronic monitor invites surveillance from us. Thus the person is banished, right, from their networks. And this keeps them from having access to their social and material resources. In terms of the self, the electronic monitor signals a dissonant and stigmatized identity, which produces mental health stressors for the person. And in what follows, I will go in detail presenting the consequences produced by the electronic monitor when a shackled person interacts with these 3 areas: the state, the community, and the self. So in these sections of the findings, I show that immigrants that are coerced to wear the electronic monitor and that these shackles malfunction, frequently triggering what ICE calls violation, thus verifying the state's assumption of immigrants' criminality. And accordingly, the state holds immigrants responsible for the electronic monitors malfunctions and then uses these malfunctions to punish immigrants wearing the input monitor further, with the simultaneous panoptic and panoptic surveillance that demands docility and compliance. And the panoptic surveillance that threatens to remove the non-compliant person via deportation. Therefore, I show the technological flaws are weaponized against this population, as the electronic monitor establishes a punitive, hyper-regulated relationship between ICE and the wearer, producing extended punishment that is mediated by a technology of fear. Here we have the case of Anielka. Anielka is a Cuban immigrant, a mother of a toddler. She was detained for 6 months, along with her mother, father, and husband. After she was released from detention, I asked her how did she get an electronic monitor. Anielka describes her enrollment in the electronic monitor program as follows. They didn't even ask me if I wanted it. The officer told me, if you want to get out, you have to wear this, right, the electronic monitor. So immigrants like Anielka are required to sign documents that traps her within a devil's burden that misrepresent their enrollment as voluntary. The alternative choice for Anielka will be to remain in detention. Also, many respondents shared frustration and reported that their devices constantly malfunction. Nora from Mexico, she explained, last night, this thing, the electronic monitor, would not stop chillando, like emitting constant warnings. I couldn't sleep, and it kept all my children awake. Teresa from Guatemala had a violation because she did not notice that the battery had died. She explained, they yelled at me, asking me where I was because I didn't show up in their machine, in their computer. So these accounts make clear that wearers are sanctioned for violations that are actually caused by a malfunctioning technology, with consequences of extended time, shackled by the electronic monitor, or in some cases, they face redetention. And shackling a person to a malfunctioning technology that is controlled by an irregular system establishes a punitive relationship between ICE and the wearer, producing extended punishment. And also, it visibly stigmatizes the immigrant as a hyper-regulated criminal alien. So after spending more than a year and a half detained, Maria, an immigrant from Honduras, a mother of 3 children, was released with an electronic monitor. Within the first months of her release, I accompanied Maria to her weekly check-in. That day, Maria was nervous because her EM had been malfunctioning during the weekend. So as we stepped into the BI office, which is the private corporation hired by ICE to run its intensive supervision appearance program, Maria's caseworker, Ruben, a Hispanic male in his late 20s, began to interrogate her about why the electronic monitor was not working. He asked her why on Friday, Maria was not appearing on his computer screen and questioned her why she disappeared. Maria explained that she was showering when the monitor began beeping. She said, I got out quick and the light was red. So I changed the battery, but nothing worked. The caseworker called me asking me where I was, and they were mad. Then I called you right away and I left a message. Ruben listened to Maria, but did not look at her. He shuffled some papers and looked in his computer. Then he said, it was good that you called me, so I know that you didn't disappear. And if ICE call me, then I can tell them that you checked with me. But if you continue to have this type of problem, we could have issues because disappearing is a violation. So this interaction between Maria and Ruben demonstrated the extent to which the disciplinary power of the state permeated Maria's everyday activities, like taking a shower, by coercing her through the technology malfunction to be an obedient body under the panoptic state surveillance or risk panoptic removal. And for Ruben, the electronic monitor authorized him to construe Maria with suspicion as a criminal alien and to hold her responsible for malfunctions that are not her fault. And these malfunctions, like I mentioned before, are recorded as violations, which trigger longer periods of time wearing the electronic monitor, or in some cases, it triggers redetention. In this second part of the findings, I show that the electronic monitor has the power to damage formerly healthy relationships with relatives, friends, and employers. Because the electronic monitor is a beacon of surveillance that attracts ICE and endangers co-ethnic wearers, they're excluded from the community, leading to isolation and social harms. immigrants become hyper-visible, mobile panopticons when the EM physically marks them. Consequently, the electronic monitor as a tool of state violence not only creates a new axis of stratification that places the wearer at a disadvantage compared to other immigrants, but also is robbing them of their networks, right, and their support. Although immigrants commit fewer crimes, they feel deeply stigmatized by the electronic monitor. Even longtime community members are not immune to the stigma of the monitor. They face questions, resistance, and worriness, even from people that previously trusted them. For instance, we have the case of Nadia here. So when Nadia saw an old friend at the supermarket, he insinuated that she had committed a crime. And that was the reason she had an electronic monitor. And Nadia recounts this encounter. So she says, I went to the grocery store. I have a friend there, and he told me, I haven't seen you in a while, because Nadia wasn't there. And I told him, look what happened to me. And I showed him the chuckle. And he says, what did you do? I said, well, nothing. I didn't do anything. I behaved good. But yes, people think that because you have the chuckle, it is because you did something wrong. You hit someone, stole something, went in jail for something. That's what they put that electronic monitor. Oh, they think for sure she has a criminal record. They look at you like you are a criminal. So what Nadia's experience tells us is that the electronic monitor is a highly visible stigma that co-ethnics associate with criminality. This divides monitor immigrants from members of the co-ethnic community, leading to social exclusion. And as a tool of state violence, the electronic monitor's ability to stratify immigrant networks is so powerful that it can restrain previously secure, reliable acts. By restricting the shackled individuals' movement, it creates an axis along which freedom is stratified, yielding a hierarchy among immigrants with electronic monitor wearers. They find themselves at the bottom. So upon release from detention, Erica felt relieved when her friend Anna offered her a place to stay in East Los Angeles. However, 4 other families shared the house. Within a few weeks, Erica realized that the ISAP's weekly unannounced home visits were triggering anxiety in the household. And Erica told me in a worry voice, the señora of the house, Gabi, rents the garage and the back too. But the people there don't know about my situation, that she's wearing an electronic monitor. They don't have papers, and they saw immigration come to the house. I don't want them to get in trouble because of me. Gabi asked me to leave. So I'm looking for another place, but I don't have money. No one wants to hire me because of this thing, the electronic monitor. So Erica's account makes clear that while immigrants are under surveillance, they become a dangerous liability to their own networks and to their own households and to the rest of the community. They become a direct target of ICE agents because their location is monitored in real time. And any mistake can trigger ICE showing up to their house. And then, as we all know, ICE agents, they can make collateral arrests since relatives and housemates most likely are also undocumented. And these fears and concerns are real and often lead members of the community to distance themselves from the people wearing the electronic monitor. So the fears experienced by Erica's housemates are not unfounded because the electronic monitor, like I said before, it collects data on the wearer's location. and places everyone around the wearer at risk of detection. And ICE also has been known to use this data that they collect and use it to raise households and also workplaces. So with Erica's experience, we can see how the electronic monitor is organized and access of a stratification that transformed Erica into a bearer of state violence and placed her also as a disadvantage, even compared to other undocumented immigrants. So her banishment from her social networks and employment in turn produces greater social and economic uncertainty and insecurity. So immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants, utilize their co-ed networks for the critical survival and for securing jobs. Immigrants marked with an electronic monitor cannot successfully access these opportunities because they are a liability, right, to other undocumented workers who must avoid ICE. When potential employers encounter people using the GPS ankle monitor or the electronic monitor, they view these candidates as liabilities and are less likely to offer jobs. So this is what Carmela, an immigrant from Mexico, experienced the first time she went out searching for work after she was released from detention. She went to ask for a job as a cook at a restaurant that she used to frequent before she was detained. Carmela knew the owner and assumed that she would be given the job, especially after the owner asked her to cook a sample dish. The owner said, "Oh, you cook very well, but to my bad luck, this device, the electronic monitor, began to beep. And she asked me what was happening. I could not lie to her. I told her I was released from detention and immigration had put this shackle on me. She said, oh no, I can't give you work because I have people here who do not have documents. And I don't want that when ICE comes looking for you, that they take them away too."
Can I ask you a clarification question?
Yes.
It beeps randomly or because you have gone beyond a certain prescribed area?
No, it can be randomly because sometimes the battery doesn't properly get loaded. So supposedly it's 8 hours that the battery is supposed to last, but sometimes it's been like 2 hours and then it starts beeping. And that's where immigrants show their frustration. They're like, this is supposed to last this amount of time, but it's not. And that's where the stigma and also the fear and the isolation comes, because people don't want that embarrassment, right? That's the stigmatization to follow them when they are going on about the thing. So, like I said, this account, so this account of Carmela demonstrates that electronic monitor obstruct immigrant access to their informal networks and support within their cooperative community, because as we saw in this case, potential employers perceive the people shackled to an electronic monitor as a liability to the safety of their immigrant employees. So in this last section, I examine how a stigmatized identity brought by the electronic monitor produces mental health harms. Being shackled to an electronic monitor creates a stigmatized identity that brings stress, fear, and trauma that ICE is going to apprehend and deport the wearer and also their families. In essence, this section is emphasizing the toll that the electronic monitor imposes on the minds and bodies of individual immigrants. So bearing the brunt of a visible stigma is emotionally taxing. For instance, we have the case of Karen, She's a Salvadoran mother of 3 children. And when she decided to wear shorts to her neighborhood liquor store, bystanders stare at her electronic monitor. And a group of customers in this store were eyeing her electronic monitor and started murmuring. So when I talked to her about this experience, she explained her frustration and also how it was impacting her emotionally. So she says, I am tired of people looking at me like that. I feel discriminated against because I carry this thing, the electronic monitor. My self-esteem is low. I feel desperate. So in a way, Karen is struggling to maintain self-respect in the face of others' apparent judgment. Basic dignity becomes nearly impossible to sustain when an immigrant is brutalized by the state violence, as we are going to see with the case of Nadia. So Nadia was driving her children and siblings to school when ICE agents intercepted her car, broke her window, and dragged Nadia out. The children that were present screamed and pleaded to the officer to stop. Nadia and some of her children were handcuffed on the ground. Her teenage daughter captured the arrest on video. And when Nadia watched the video online, because this video was uploaded by a news agency, she felt humiliated. And she read comments on YouTube such as, only a criminal gets arrested like that. So following this episode, Nadia started getting a lot frequent nightmares. The ICE will return and seize her. And she felt that she was living in perpetual fear. And this perpetual fear did alter the way she inhabited the world. And also how she understood her place in it. And yet, immigrants resist the meaning of the electronic monitor, which frames them as criminal, a label that produces profound cognitive dissonance, in addition to deep shame. So when Nadia showed me the electronic monitor, she broke into tears and said, when they put it on, I felt humiliated because this is what they put on criminals. And I am not a criminal. So burdened with the stigma of the monitor, Nadia's sense of herself as someone who poses no threat to society is violated on the repressive and the immigrant state monitoring. The electronic monitor also really restricted her activities. As I mentioned before, Nadia is a mother. So Nadia's ability to not only provide for her kids was constrained, but also when she wanted to attend parent teachers conferences, she couldn't do it. So the EM, or the electronic monitor, obligates the world to accept the consequences attached to the state's label of criminal element, even as the individual attempts to preserve their self-respect, right, by rejecting this label as an actor. When reports surface in Los Angeles about raids, Maria, the Honduran mother, considered skipping her upcoming check-in. She was afraid to attend because ICE recently apprehended her friend. We met outside the building, and the anxiety that Maria felt was palpable as she constantly was biting her fingernails. She said to me, I feel so afraid and anxious when I come here to her check-in. I might just cut this thing, the electronic monitor, and throw it away. Go to another state. I am desperate. Now, things are just getting worse with this devil, Trump. But if I go, what am I going to do with Sophia, Maria's 6-year-old daughter? So Maria's account confirms the vulnerability the electronic monitor wearers experience. Although Maria has complied with the requirements of her conditional release, she reported feeling coerced to take drastic steps to avoid apprehension for the sake of self-preservation. When the state frames monitoring individuals as non-compliant and risky, this may encourage behavior that helps the immigrant survive by avoiding detention and also deportation. So using this framework of extended punishment, I was able to analyze the relationship of immigrants shackled to an electronic monitor and how it operates as a surveillance tool that influences the immigrants' relationship in three areas: the state, the community, and the self. Immigrants that are shackled to a malfunctioning electronic monitor establish a punitive relationship between ICE and the wearer, producing this extended punishment. The state holds immigrants responsible for electronic monitor malfunctions that are beyond their control, and then uses those malfunctions to punish the person further with the simultaneous panopticon and panopticon surveillance. And through this construction of immigrants as criminal aliens, a banishment of the person is reinforced, not only from mainstream society, but most importantly, from the co-ethnic networks. The EM has the power to damage formerly healthy relationships with relatives, with friends, with employers, because like I mentioned before, the electronic monitor is a beacon of surveillance that attracts eyes and not only endangers the person wearing the electronic monitor, but also the rest of the community. And this is what leads to isolation and further social harms. And in terms of immigrants' sense of self, individuals show evidence of mental health harms when the electronic monitors reifies a dissonant and stigmatized identity. Being shackled to an electronic monitor brings stress, fear, and trauma. The ICE is going to apprehend the person at any time, and they will face deportation. So my research demonstrates that punitive practices continue to shape immigrants' everyday life after they are released from detention, creating a condition of extended punishment that produces material, social, and health harms. This research extends the literature on the criminalization of immigrants through the state surveillance apparatus by examining the role of electronic monitors in the production of punishment. Immigrant vulnerabilities to criminalization do not stem from federal immigration policy alone, but rather a new system of visual branding that reinforces immigrants' subordinate status by constructing them as criminal aliens. And also the electronic monitor produces a new axis of stratification that places the person wearing the electronic monitor as a disadvantage compared to other immigrants, because the freedom, their autonomy, and mobility are all under surveillance. Therefore, this tool of state violence creates a whole new underclass of people. And it also creates a division and hierarchy within immigrant communities, and therefore making wearers more vulnerable to state violence. So the findings that I have presented to you today, I believe that it can be leveraged for possible policy changes in order to change and mitigate the harms produced by the immigration enforcement system in immigrant communities. The whole apparatus of electronic monitor surveillance rests on the idea that in order to make sure immigrants under deportation procedures appear in court, they need to be shackled to an electronic monitor. However, before the events of September 11, the INS, which is Immigration and Naturalization Services, what later became ICE, had partnered with community organizations and provided holistic services that ensure immigrants receive support with their cases, such as by providing legal support and also medical services and also information on housing and translation and transportation services. These programs proved to be successful, not only ensuring compliance with court appearances, but also provided guidance, right, for immigrants trying to make a new life in the United States. Therefore, the use of electronic monitors is not more effective at ensuring appearance in court. On the contrary, it harms immigrants and their communities. And in some cases, it can coerce individuals to abscond in order to self-preserve. So in its current form, the immigration system does not provide a clear guidance of who is given an electronic monitor and who is not. And if this continues, there needs to be a clear review process and justification of who gets an electronic monitor. And I believe that the current administration should mandate ICE to track the data needed to prevent discriminatory practices, because as you know, that recently most of the people that are getting shackled are African immigrants. Provide also both a clear written justification and review process when deciding to subject an individual to ankle shackles, and allow those subjects to secure employment, right? To participate in family and community activities, and also seek medical treatment. And lastly, there needs to be a severance between the link between immigration enforcement and service provision through community-based programs, as well as allocation of government funding for community support and legal representation services. This concludes the presentation. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions and comments.
So do you mind, you can call on people, is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, and then, oh yeah, sure.
Probably, so that I think it can get recorded.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Are you looking for some water?
I'm looking for a pen.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know.
Yeah, good.
Yes.
Thank you for that talk. Wow, this is really loud. Thank you for the talk, Mirian. It was super interesting. I was wondering if you can help me understand towards the end of the talk when you talked about the ways that this could be administered. And just help me understand who gets a bracelet, who or a shackle. I actually like that name better. Or what's the process of assignment? Like who gets them, who doesn't get them? How does that work? And I know you had some material early in the talk that give us some insight, but just like teach me so we understand exactly how this gets allocated.
Yes, that's a great question, and thank you for bringing it up. So, I think I'll take it. So when the process in which the electronic monitor gets decided, it tends to be very obscure, because it relies heavily on this broad discretion of the immigration officer. So the reason why most of the people that get shackled to an electronic monitor tend to be women and not men is because we have this whole rhetoric, right, in immigration that Latino men and immigrant men are a threat to Homeland Security, to the security of the nation. And we have this other rhetoric of Latina women, immigrant women, are coming to this country in order to be protected and in a certain way infantilized, right? So this is the framework in which the ICE officers and the people that make the decision of who gets an electronic monitor or not, they operate. So when they are releasing people from detention, they have this dual idea, and they tend to allocate more electronic monitors, electronic shackles to women as compared to men. For men, it's a massive, obviously, apprehension, longer detention, and deportation.
Okay. Is in like, what's the breakdown like? I mean, how many people that are released end up with these monitors? You know, I'm sure far more detained and deported.
Yes.
But like, give me some basic sense of like how big these are compared to each other.
Okay, so at the time that I was conducting research and I was on the field work, from my respondents, all of them received an electronic monitor. But based on the data, it gradually increased. It went for being like 8 out of 10 people that were released from immigration detention a given day. Let's say they were receiving an electronic monitor. But what is also very interesting is not some people actually receive 2 electronic monitors, 1 for each leg. If you have the LexisNexis, which is a private company that pays for your bond money. So you got 1 electronic shackle because of the state, and you also got 1 because of the bond money that you were paid to the bond house.
Yeah.
So
the majority of people released, the vast majority almost.
the vast majority of them, they definitely, all of them are enrolled in a surveillance program.
Yeah.
And it could be like face recognition on your cell phone or also voice recognition. And there is also like weekly check-ins or unannounced home visits. But a big component of the surveillance program is the electronic monitor. So a lot of them do get it, and it's very constricted geographically because a lot of certain people are allowed to leave their house, others not. Other people can get out of the county, others not. Other people can travel throughout the whole state, and certain people that can't. So they're very closely watched. It's like if someone were to deviate, let's say, for example, the case of Maria, she will take she was taking some, trying to get a job also in another restaurant, and she ended up going to this organization that was teaching her how to cook, and she would deviate from her regular route. ICE will help her. You know, the program will let her know, it's like, why are you taking, right, a different route to your work? So yes, the surveillance is very intense.
Can I ask a more of a clarificatory question to that?
Yes.
So this is only people who were detained and then they have a subsequent court appearance. So they are getting these shackles during the period of before their court appearance, right?
Yes. So so these people, there's a different groups, right? So there is people that cross the U.S.-Mexico border. and they are apprehended by CBP and then channeled into immigration detention, and a lot of them are seeking asylum. Then you have people that are LPR, right, like green card holders within the United States that also can be apprehended by immigration, like by ICE inside the US. And then, so these people get sent to the detention, and from there, yeah, they're released with a GPS ankle monitor.
They have green cards, they still need to be monitored.
Yeah, if they have green cards, if there is some, let's say some people have been stopped because of a DUI perhaps, or they have a domestic violence case, they also, it triggers the pre-migration paradigm, right? This process that will channel them into their criminal legal system and at the same time into the immigration, and therefore start facing these deportation procedures. So people do have a case pending at the moment that they interact with immigration, and I mean these electronic monitors supposedly are given in order to encourage people to show up, to make sure that they show up in court. Although it's been proven that it's not as successful as having community actually being involved, community organization, and helping and encouraging and taking people to court and accompanying them.
That's a question.
Oh, do I have a question? Go.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Before I get going, I did want to ask a follow-up question on your policy implications. You mentioned you want a clear review process and justification of who gets an EM. So I guess my question is, would working with maybe the local police department maybe clarify who will get the ankle monitor or who won't, or will that further stigmatize them and even further have that criminalization against them? So would it for them or against them, or how can we further review who's going to get it, what process we could go through or they would go through?
Well, I think first and foremost, I want to make clear that I think it's important that we give way with the electronic monitor. I don't think it's working. And I think that we should invest, right, funds into these community programs that don't work in collaboration with ICE. So that's really important. But if this administration and the following administration continue to shackle people, there needs to be a clear, clear review process of who is getting this ankle monitor, right? What are because the two premises for people that get the electronic ankle monitor is that they need to be a flight risk and also a danger to the community. These people are not that, but they still get it. So who is making the decision, right? The decision process that are giving these people the electronic monitor, and also the different populations, right, within their immigration detention. Like I mentioned really quickly in the talk, right now we have an exponential increase of electronic shackling of Black bodies. All of the people coming from Haiti, people from the African continent are getting it more. And also there is no research on this, but there is there is a distinction, right, of the size of the monitor. The Haitians and other people from the African continent are getting bigger and more chunky electronic monitors compared to an immigrant from Russia that is getting a more compact that tends to actually keep the battery longer. And so right is a disparity, but there is not really a process that will say who is getting it and what is the reasoning besides the reasoning of is this person a danger to the community, or is this person about to escape? Yes.
It's racist.
Definitely, yes. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, Dr. Martinez. I have two very different questions. First, is there any research or did you take on any research in regards to the impact on the children for the people you were interviewing?
That is a really important question. I did not delve into that, but based on my understanding and what I have been able to read on that, I mean, the children, they, for example, the case of what I think it was Nora, right? That she mentioned that this beeping, you know, the chillando, the electronic monitor is emitting warnings throughout the night and is waking my children up. We know the Latinx populations and especially immigrants, they tend to live in very concentrated household. So most likely she's sharing the same room, right? With her kids, with her 3 other kids. So that's one aspect. Just the fact that you have this sound that you don't have control over it, and it's also triggering fear, right, of apprehension, because at any moment, if this electronic monitor doesn't stop or it malfunctions more, it can trigger consequences, right, which is like fear of apprehension, deportation, or in some cases, right, redetention. The stigma, right, the electronic monitor carries with it. The children, I mean, there were cases where they were with their parents in the bus, right, and the electronic monitor started emitting warnings. People look at you, right, when you look at an electronic monitor, people right away think about criminal. I think that now Latinx communities are more aware and they can connect it to immigration. But during, you know, the beginning of the middle of the Obama administration, people were not really cognizant of that. So the stigma that's associated is another way that children are being impacted, right? And the constant fear of surveillance that the parents any moment can be taken from them.
And sorry, follow up to that, is there any protocols for what ICE does with the children? Like in one case, I mentioned there was someone who interviewed her, her husband, and I think her parents were taken. She had a toddler, so was the toddler taken with them, or where did the toddler go?
So that was Anielka's case, and she was from Cuba, but she is from Cuba, and her family, they actually migrated from Cuba to Mexico. And from Mexico, they crossed the border, and they were looking for political asylum. So all of them were taken. The baby was actually sent to a family member in Florida. I think it was Miami, if I remember correctly. So, but they stay in there for like the whole family is staying there. At Nielka for 6 months, but I believe her mother and father and husband stayed there longer, and she was allowed to leave because of the baby, right? So I think after that, the second person that got out of detention was the mom, and then the husband and father stayed there longer. Yes.
I have a quick question. You briefly mentioned in your presentation that you also did interviews with former people who had the ankle monitor, and I wanted to see if during your interviews you were able to see how like the consequences of extended punishment continued after their ankle monitor was removed, or if it did at all.
That's an excellent question. I interviewed people with the monitor, although I did continue my conversations with them after, but that was like outside of the scope of this chapter and my research to a certain extent. But the fear of apprehension continued. For example, Nadia, which is the person that was having recurring nightmares that ICE was going to come back and get her, even after the monitor was removed, she continued struggling with that. because, and this is related, because her case was not done, right? The monitor was removed, but now she needed to continue fighting her case in court. I would say that, you know, relationships that were damaged during the electronic monitor time that the person was wearing, I mean, those relationships, they are difficult to repair. For some of them were, because they were asked, you know, some of them were asked to move out of the house. So then people felt that, you know, kind of like, well, you weren't there for me when I needed you. Why, you know, why is that? How can we continue this relationship? So there definitely, you know, that was impacted, and also their job, right, opportunities, because when they were having the electronic monitor, yes, it was, they lost that opportunity and then impacted everything else. So it was really hard to catch up, right, financially.
Yeah, so I was kind of thinking about parallels here. We know that, right, sort of how debt is compounded for individuals who are in detention centers, right? So we know that people, let's say on probation or parole, if they have ankle monitors, they have to pay for that. If they're to court, it's like they incur all these extra debt, which ultimately sets them up for failure long term. It puts them at an increased disadvantage. So I wondered if there are any parallels here where this sort of compounded debt they may experience by being one of these detention centers, and additional costs. So you talk about loss of work potentially, or discrimination or stigma attached to that, but even just the costs affiliated with or associated with being in a detention center and having an ankle monitor and these kinds of things, right, might have these other sort of collateral consequences down the road for them, even if their case is cleared. So I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Yes, there is definitely, so when immigrants are presented, they go to court and they see a judge, right? The judge usually sets an amount of for the bond. They said, okay, we're gonna give you a bond, pretty much pay for your freedom. It's gonna be, for some people, $20,000. I have seen some people get a bond of $60,000. People that come from the Middle East, and also I saw a lot of Bangladeshi and Pakistani people get bonds that were $90,000 and $100,000. And so these people needed to come up with the money one way or another, or face deportation. Some of them reach out to this bond company named LexisNexis, and they actually put the money up front for them, but that required that extra ankle monitor and constant payment of $300 to $400 monthly for the rental of the electronic monitor. And also, on top of it, the payment of the bond, which was like, you know, $10,000, $15,000, $60,000. So people went in massive debt. And so the expectation that immigrant communities are gonna be able to pay this money, right? It's ridiculous. But people in the desperation to sign contracts, they wanted out of the detention because of the conditions that I outlined, right? And they wanted the freedom. So, and people that couldn't afford, they continue staying in detention, right? Longer and longer. Like the case of Maria was there for close to 3 years. She went for review every 6 months, and the judge would be like, okay, it's $30,000. Maria's like, I can pay that. I don't have the money, I don't have the networks. So she finally waited long enough that her bond got lowered to $2,000, and she was able to, do through an organization, was able to do a GoFundMe page and all of that, and the money was collected and it was paid, and she was able to gain her freedom.
Another form of extended punishment, right? I mean, that's the thing, it goes on and on and on for years and years after.
Right.
You have all the step amounts. So I do have a question from someone online. I wanted to make sure that I got these in. We're almost out of time here. So why do you believe there's a connection in the methods of punishment between ICE and our prison system? And that's Joanna Arias.
The connection between the criminal justice system and immigration system.
This person said, why do you believe there's a connection in the methods of punishment between ICE and our prison system?
Well, I believe that they feed on each other. The criminal legal system, based also on the laws, the legislations that I outlined in the presentation, provided the foundation, right? For the escalation of anti-immigrant sentiment and also anti-immigrant punishment. I mean, the electronic monitor has been used in the criminal justice system. I mean, we have so much scholarship, right, in that area. Help us now understand, right, how these two systems are connected. So punishment and control are distilled, I would say, the punishment and control faced by immigrants is distilled from the criminal legal system. So they go on, like interlock and tandem really well.
Okay, we're out of time because I know you have another meeting soon, so thank you so much.